Welcome to the second round Louie Tee Network Draft Party Live. This is the pre-prep for the second and third round of the NFL Draft, day number 2. And before we go to day number 2 of the draft, I kind of want to take a look at day 1 and the first round and recap that quickly. And I want to go in reverse order because, as you get to the tail end of the first round, less attention to detail. You've been watching the draft for about 4 hours or so, kind of have fatigue. You're kind of at the point now where you just want to kind of get it over with if it's not your team. So I want to spend a little bit more time analyzing that back end of the first round and work our way up to the top of the draft. So we'll work in reverse order here, and I just want to go over the first round leading up to the second round, and we'll be talking about the second round here in a little bit. We're 25 minutes away from the Cleveland Browns hitting the clock. I want to talk about them and potentially trading out of that first pick of the second round, pick number 32 overall. So let's look at the first round quickly and recap what happened. So the Seahawks, remember, they traded back to 31 with the Denver Broncos, allowing the Broncos to come up. They took Paxton Lynch, quarterback, out of Memphis. So let's look at the Seahawks pick. Jermaine Ifedi, out of Texas A&M, big 6'6", 324-pound guard. Tackle at Texas A&M. Remember, 4th consecutive year a first-round tackle was taken out of Texas A&M. You look at all of the guys that have come out of there. They haven't had the best success, but I think Jermaine Ifedi's best position may actually be guard in the National Football League. We will see because, again, it doesn't really matter where he plays. The Seahawks could use some help along that offensive line. So we'll see what happens with that selection. It's refreshing to see them spend a high-level pick on an offensive lineman because for years I felt like they had just put Band-Aids on the offensive line and not really focusing in on that position, those positions up front to protect Russell Wilson. They have Tom Cable as their offensive line coach, and so a lot of times you can get away with potentially drafting a guy in the later rounds, as they've done with guys like J.R. Sweezy, who's no longer there, but taking a defensive lineman and flipping him over and making him an offensive lineman. And so it's good to see them spending resources early on in the draft on positions of need along that offensive line. Look at the Carolina Panthers. They make the 30th pick in the draft, and it wasn't a controversial pick. It was a Dave Gettleman pick. It's a pick that we see Dave Gettleman make very often. A lot was made of him allowing Josh Norman to walk in free agency by rescinding the franchise tag because he was going to have to pay Star Lotulelei, because he was going to have to pay K'Wan Short coming up in the next offseason, because they just went out and got Paul Soliai. You think to yourself, there's no way they're going to select another defensive lineman here, but yet that is what they did. I thought it was going to be pass rusher. I thought it was going to be cornerback. Dave Gettleman, in his very stubborn way, did it his way. And that's the one thing I will give Dave Gettleman credit for is he does it his way. This is the way that he likes to set up his organization. This is the way he likes to build rosters from inside out. And I've talked about this for at least 3 years now, that Dave Gettleman is a stickler for being tough and physical in the trenches. And you saw the result of that last year with that defensive line really dominating up front, those linebackers behind them being able to run free and make plays. So Vernon Butler's going to come in, athletically gifted freak out of La Tech, going to come in, wreak some havoc along that defensive line. You put him next to the guys that are already on that defensive line, and he's going to come right in, fit like a glove, and help them out. I just thought they could have used some more edge pressure in Carolina. I think they need to get to the quarterback more from the edges, not just the interior of that defensive line. And I know Coney Ely came on at the end of the season, but he's still unproven. He still needs to take that next step. I thought there were options like Kevin Dodd out of Clemson sitting there for them to take. I thought they could have went cornerback. Mackenzie Alexander was sitting there for them to take. Instead, they opted to go defensive line with Vernon Butler. Look at the Arizona Cardinals. I think another one of these great value picks of the first round. And it all depends on who you talk to. Cardinals at 29 take Robert Nkemdiche out of Ole Miss. Here's a guy, we know about all the off-the-field issues that's been chronicled. I'm not going to beat that dead horse. What I will say is this guy's ultra-talented, and the Cardinals realized that. They went out, they got him, and I think in that environment, and I think this is why this is a great pick, because in that Arizona Cardinals locker room are a bunch of guys that I think can rein Robert Nkemdiche in, can get him on the straight and narrow and get him to focus where the focus needs to be, on the football field. And so I think this is a really good landing spot for him. And I think they got a hell of a football player because the guy is talented. There's no doubt about that. You put on the tape, you watch him play against Alabama, you watch him play against Florida, you watch him play in some of these games, and you see a guy that has the potential to take over a football game from the defensive tackle spot. And so that's a heck of a pickup for the Arizona Cardinals. They got some good value at the end of round one. Like I said before, and I'll say it again, top 10 talent, okay, in this draft, but he's not a top 10 player. Maybe the Arizona Cardinals can get him as a player and his talent to match up as they get him at number 29. 28, this was a trade that the 49ers executed with the Kansas City Chiefs. And I'll tell you a quick, fascinating story. Chiefs actually wanted to get their hands on Laquan Treadwell. And so they were hoping that he would fall to them. They actually tried to trade up to get their hands on Laquan Treadwell, but their deal was not sweet enough to get the team that they were talking to come off of that pick. So they, once they didn't have the option there to get the guy that they wanted, they saw fit to move out. 49ers move in. And let's talk about both of their selections in the first round, because the 49ers had two. Trading back into the first round at pick 28 to get guard Joshua Garnett out of Stanford. Many regard him as the best blocking offensive lineman, not just guard, but offensive lineman in this entire draft. And so this is a guy that they could definitely use. I talked about the ineptitude along that offensive line with Eric Pears and company last year on that offensive line, especially on that right side of the offensive line. You've got a guy like Anthony Davis who's supposed to be returning from his sabbatical. He doesn't want to play in San Francisco anymore. He's demanding a trade. So you need an offensive line help. 49ers trade back into the first round and get it. And so also, the seventh overall selection in the draft, DeForest Buckner, really good pickup for them. Pair him up with Eric Armstead, who was the first round pick of the 49ers last year. So now you got a really big defensive line. Both of these guys played with Chip Kelly in Oregon. So this is a really good move for the 49ers, getting some big, athletic, beefy guys on that defensive line, trying to kind of bring back the days of Justin Smith when that defensive line was dominant and those linebackers were able to run free and make plays. So two big pickups for the 49ers in the first round. They do not have a second-round pick because of this trade, so we won't see them until the third round, if I'm not mistaken. I think they might have given up that third-round pick as well. I'll check back on you with that. But Packers at 27, probably one of the most head-scratching picks of the first round was Kenny Clark, defensive tackle out of UCLA. Look, not saying that the guy's not talented, but with all of the players available on the board at the time, no one really suspected the Packers taking Kenny Clark at 27. They could have went in a number of different directions. They ultimately settled in on Kenny Clark, and to me, he's a guy that is a space eater. He's a guy that will hold the point of attack, but he's not a playmaker to me. And so I'm a little iffy on the pick. We'll see what happens. I trust Ted Thompson, however, so we'll see if Ted Thompson gets this one right. 26, we talked about this already briefly. Broncos trade into the up in the first round from 31 to 26 with the Seahawks, allowing the Seahawks to move back and later on select Jermaine Ifedi. Broncos come up, get Paxton Lynch, quarterback out of Memphis. It was a big get for them because they were sniffing around Colin Kaepernick. They were sniffing around Ryan Fitzpatrick. They were sniffing around a lot of these quarterbacks out there because they don't have a settled position. And this is not going to fix their position short term. Long term, he could be the answer for them, but I don't think he's going to be the guy that starts for them day one. That still probably is going to be Dirty Ches. But when it's all said and done, they needed a guy that they could look to potentially be the franchise quarterback, and they get that in Paxton Lynch. I think the Broncos are elated that he fell in the draft to them at 26. They made the move to go up and get him, and so they get their guy, most likely their quarterback of the future, in Paxton Lynch. You go to 25, another head-scratching pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Artie Burns, cornerback out of Miami. Look, not an indictment on the player, but your little kind of disconcerting because I think the Steelers, if they had their way, would have taken William Jackson III. He comes off the board right before them. And this is shades of last year's draft. If you remember, Baltimore Ravens trade right in front of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I think wanted to take the tight end out of Minnesota. And the Ravens trade in front of them, get the tight end, and so they missed out because of a divisional rival. I think this happened to them again. Cincinnati Bengals had the pick right in front of them. Take William Jackson III off the board right before the Steelers could select. But what makes me think that maybe they were sold on Artie Burns from the jump was that as soon as the pick went in for the Cincinnati Bengals and William Jackson III, the Steelers turned their pick in. So maybe they had already said if William Jackson III is in there, we're going with Artie Burns, and they had already made up their mind. Either way, they get a corner that can make plays on the football, but I think needs a lot of refining in terms of footwork and being able to play in off coverage, and he's not that great of a tackler either. But Steelers get a cornerback out of Miami, Artie Burns. 24, just talked about William Jackson III coming off the board, cornerback out of Houston. Going to give the Cincinnati Bengals some depth at corner. It helps them get younger, too. They already have some young guys at corner, Josh Shaw, Darquez, Denard. They have guys there that, are younger guys at the cornerback position, but none of them have evolved yet. So we'll see if he can come in and take that position by the horns and put a stranglehold on it and start to crack that lineup and see if he can help them in the back half of that defense. They have a young secondary. If those guys all come to fruition, they have a young secondary. They locked up George Iloka in free agency. Still have Sean Williams back there as a veteran presence. So I think the Cincinnati Bengals are building something in that secondary if these guys can play up to their full potential. You go to the 23rd pick in the draft. This was one that I think a lot of us saw coming. Vikings take Laquan Treadwell, wide receiver out of Ole Miss. To me, no-brainer. Teddy B needed some weapons. They got the guy that they were looking to get at number 23. It's a good pick. We all know what he possesses, and they think he's going to get faster. Remember, he was coming off of a major knee injury the year prior, and so he came back last year, wasn't as fast, but he was still as productive as he was before. So I love the pick for the Minnesota Vikings there at 23. 22, Redskins surprised a lot of people. They moved back. Remember, Redskins originally 21st pick in the draft, moved back one selection, allowed the Texans to go up and get Will Fuller. Redskins moved back a slot. A lot of people, including myself, were just assumed that it would be a defensive lineman. Turned out to be a wide receiver in Josh Doxson. To me, the best wide receiver in the entire draft. Redskins get a really good football player. Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson may not be back next year. Both are in situations where this could be their last seasons as Washington Redskins. So this is a big move for the Redskins getting Josh Doxson. You go to 21, Houston Texans, Will Fuller takes the top off the defense. Big play threat out of Notre Dame. One of the fastest receivers in this draft. Texans have been sniffing around Will Fuller the entire draft process. This was not a surprise. They traded up one pick with the Redskins, give up a 2017 sixth-round pick to move up one spot to make sure they get the guy that they coveted at the wide receiver position to go opposite of Nuke. So you go out, get the quarterback and the running back in the offseason, and you go out and get him another target to throw the football to in Will Fuller for the Texans. Jets at 20. Get Darren Lee out of the Ohio State University. Darren Lee making himself the 5th Ohio State Buckeye to go in the first 20 picks of this draft. And so Darren Lee, very athletic linebacker, can run sideline to sideline, make plays on the football. And so he's one of those guys that I thought would come off the board a little bit sooner. I thought Atlanta would be a destination for him, Buffalo possibly. He lasted to 20, and the Jets get themselves a good football player at the linebacker position in Darren Lee. Buffalo Bills at 19, to me, another one of these teams that I thought would go in a different direction than what they did. But then again, Shaq Lawson, defensive end / outside linebacker out of Clemson, wasn't supposed to be there at 19. And I think the Bills looked up and said, what is this guy doing here? So they make the decision to pull the trigger on Shaq Lawson, make him the selection at 19. I think a lot of people were scared off by Shaq Lawson potentially needing shoulder surgery before the season. And so I think that had a lot to do with him sliding down draft boards. But the Buffalo Bills said, we don't care whether he needs it or not. We're going to take this guy. He's a talented football player, and he's going to help us defensively where the Bills struggled mightily last season. You go to the 18th pick in the draft. I think this was a no-brainer. This was the one I told you I regretted yesterday. Ryan Kelly out of Alabama, the best center prospect in this draft class by far. Colts needed some help on the interior of that offensive line. They need to protect Andrew Luck. To me, this was a no-brainer. Ryan Grigson finally got it right. Make the pick. Ryan Kelly, center out of Alabama, now in Indianapolis. Colt at 18. Falcons surprised many of us with the pick of safety Keanu Neal out of Florida. Here's a safety that I didn't think would go this early in the draft. I said he could sneak into the first round. It'll be in the latter portion, but it won't be early on in this draft or in the middle of this draft. Well, he went smack dab in the middle of this draft to the Atlanta Falcons at 17. They get a physical, hard-nosed, playmaking safety in Keanu Neal. It's going to lay the hammer down and really dislodge the football, make some plays in that secondary. So I think this is the type of player that the Falcons were looking for. And I think they wanted Carl Joseph. He went off the board a few picks earlier at 14 to the Raiders, and so they take the next best option, Keanu Neal, safety out of Florida. 16, Lions, they take Taylor Decker, tackle out of Ohio State University, the Ohio State University. Again, another one of these guys that I felt like, or teams that I felt like needed to get some help up front. Matthew Stafford was harassed last year, and it was because the offensive line was porous. They get a new general manager, and he said the first order of business was protecting Matthew Stafford and getting better up front. He held true to his promise, going out, getting an offensive lineman like Taylor Decker that I think is going to be able to anchor that offensive line for years to come. 15, Cleveland Browns traded back to 15 and allowed the Titans to come up to 8, and they ultimately selected tackle Jack Conklin. And so the Browns move back to 15 and take Corey Coleman, wide receiver out of Baylor, the first receiver off the board in the 2016 NFL draft. Love the pick. He gives them a bunch of versatility. Again, they lose Travis Benjamin in the offseason to the Chargers. And so you're looking for a guy that can come in, return some punts, maybe even some kickoffs for you, but more importantly, can catch the football, be a playmaker as a wide receiver. He can do all of those things for them. And I think Corey Coleman, big pickup for the Cleveland Browns. You go to the Raiders at 14, the Oakland Raiders. Select Carl Joseph, safety out of West Virginia. To me, the best safety in this draft, hands down. To me, if he was healthy, he might have been a top 10 pick in this draft. That's how highly I think of Carl Joseph, and the Raiders thought so as well, making him the 14th selection in this draft. Carl Joseph is a guy that can hit, can drop over the slot, can run, can make some plays. He's got infinite range. Love Carl Joseph. Love the pick. If he's healthy, the Raiders just got themselves a heck of a football player in their secondary in Carl Joseph. You go to 13, Miami Dolphins, to me, might have got the steal of the first round, okay? At 13, Laramie Tunsil, we all know about the drama that surrounded him yesterday in day one of the draft. He fell all the way from potentially the 6th overall pick to the Baltimore Ravens, all the way down to 13 because of the whole marijuana video. And so despite all of that, he's the best tackle to me in this draft. And the Dolphins got an absolute steal with this selection at 13. And he's going to come in, and if he stays clean, and that's the most important thing, if he's able to stay clean, this is the absolute steal of the first round. Dolphins got themselves a top 5 player. The guy that ultimately, if the Titans don't trade out of 1, could have been the first overall selection in this draft. They get him at number 13. You go to number 12 in the New Orleans Saints. They select Sheldon Rankins, defensive tackle out of Louisville. Here's a guy that is going to help them anchor that defensive line. He's someone that is going to give them a little bit of stoutness up front. They struggled stopping the run. They struggled getting pressure on the quarterback. He's not a one-trick pony, however. He can get to the quarterback. I wasn't a huge Sheldon Rankins fan. In fact, I think the Saints, if they had it their way, would have taken Vernon Hargreaves III. He wasn't on the board, so he went a pick before them. I know that had to sting to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and divisional rival at that, but nonetheless, Sheldon Rankins probably was their backup plan and a good one. He's going to come in, help them stop the run, and get a little bit of pressure on the quarterback as well. You go to number 11, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Just talked about them trading back from 9 to 11 with the Chicago Bears, allowing the Bears to go up and get Leonard Floyd. Never, ever trust a man with 2 first names. They move back to 11, and they select cornerback Vernon Hargreaves III, VH3. To me, the best corner in this draft. Can do everything on the field, can play press, can play off, can play man, can play zone, can high point the football. He's a playmaker. His eyes and lack of discipline sometimes can get him into trouble. But if you're talking about a guy that's going to tackle, that's going to be very tenacious, that's going to give you everything he's got on every single snap, can play the football, is a feisty defender, you're talking about Vernon Hargreaves III, and the Buccaneers get him at 11 in that secondary. Giants at 10, another one of these picks that a lot of people didn't see coming, somewhat of a head scratcher, and I feel like the Giants had a gun to their head at 10. Here's the situation. They wanted Leonard Floyd. He went off the board at 9. Bears knew the situation, traded up in front of them to get their hands on Leonard Floyd. They wanted Ezekiel Elliott. He was going at the Cowboys at 4. They would have taken Jack Conklin. He was gone. They would have taken Ronnie Stanley. He was gone. They didn't want to take Laramie Tunsil because of the bad press and the situation with the video. So what did they do? They went to the last option available for them, which was cornerback Eli Apple out of Ohio State. To me, not necessarily the best pick for them. And you already got Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. You went out and got Janoris Jenkins. Don't necessarily know if this was a need per se, but they went out and they made this selection. And to me, we'll see how this all pans out for them. You can never have enough corners. You can never have enough pass rushers. They go out, they get Eli Apple at the 10th pick in the draft. Let's see how he pans out in New York. At 9, I talked about this already. The Bears trade up with the Buccaneers and select Leonard Floyd, outside linebacker out of Georgia. Here's a guy that to me is the best pass rusher, pure pass rusher. If you just line this guy up on the edge and say, go get the quarterback, to me, he could be the best pass rusher in this draft when it's all said and done. He bends well. He's the type of guy that, and I told you, he's got the most electric move in this draft. That inside swim move rip is, to me, the best and most dominant move of any pass rusher in this draft. So, to me, Leonard Floyd has all the qualities you're looking for. He's a long, active defender. Remember, Vic Fangio took Aldon Smith and turned him into a star in this league, and he has the same measurables, does Leonard Floyd, as a Aldon Smith. And so I think that this is the logical fit for him. They're going to take this guy and they're going to try to turn him into a monster in year 1 in Chicago. At 8, the Titans traded up with the Browns and take tackle Jack Conklin. We knew that the Titans were going to try to get back into the top 10. We just didn't know when and where and for who. Now we found out it was going to be for Jack Conklin, tackle out of Michigan State. He's going to help solidify that offensive line. Probably going to put him at right tackle opposite of Taylor Lewan. And they're going to move on and have bookend tackles protecting Marcus Mariota and giving them the best opportunity to be able to run the football with a little bit of success with their newly acquired running back, DeMarco Murray. You go on to number 7, the 49ers. And I talked about this already. Don't want to really talk about it a lot more because we've already touched on this. 49ers take DeForest Buckner out of Oregon, defensive lineman, big guy, physical guy. I don't think he's reached his peak or apex yet in this, as a football player. So I think he's only going to get better. He's a big physical specimen along the defensive line. Baltimore Ravens at 6 take Ronnie Stanley, offensive tackle out of Notre Dame. Look, this is a guy that I think has all the measurables. He's long, he's athletic, good feet, very aware. I think Laramie Tunsil would have been a better option at 6, but it came down to off the field. And if you thought that these two guys were equal going into the draft, maybe Tunsil had a little bit of the edge. Tunsil's off the field issues coupled with Ronnie Stanley being clean off the field was enough to make the Ravens say, you know what, we don't want to deal with the headache. We want to stay clean. We've already had the issues with guys off the field, whether it be Ray Rice or it be the safety that they cut loose last year, Will Hill. We don't want any more issues, and so they got rid of that whole scenario by selecting offensive tackle Ronnie Stanley out of Notre Dame. At 5, another steal in this draft to me, Jalen Ramsey goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars at 5. A lot of people thought he could have been the 3rd pick in the draft to the Chargers. A lot of people thought no way he's getting past the Cowboys at 4. He does, clears both of those teams, ends up in Jacksonville, fits a need, gives them an elite player potentially in that secondary where I think they lack the most talent. I think they're talented up front in the front 7. I think they're talented all over the place offensively. I think they lack elite talent in that secondary. Now Jalen Ramsey gives them an elite football player, at least talent-wise, in that secondary. Let's see how he develops in Jacksonville. Dallas Cowboys, to me, probably made the smartest pick of the first round. If the Colts made one of the smartest picks, I think the Cowboys might have trumped them just ever so slightly by taking Ezekiel Elliott. I talked about this last year. You saw the video. I talked about the Cowboys needing to take a running back and needed to take Ezekiel Elliott more specifically in the top 5 of this draft if he was available to them, because to me, he gives them the best opportunity to win right now. He upgrades this roster more so than any other player, and he impacts this team, more importantly, more so than any of the players that they could have gotten at the top of the draft. This guy's a touchdown-making machine. He's a 3-down back, something that they lacked on that football team. They get Ezekiel Elliott, and to me, he's going to help change the game in Big D for many years to come. Chargers at 3 surprised everyone by taking defensive end Joey Bosa out of the Ohio State University. I don't think anyone saw that one coming. Bosa is a guy that can get pressure on the quarterback, can stick his hand in the dirt, can also stand up. I don't know how the Chargers are going to try to utilize him, but a lot of teams play in nickel packages now because of how the NFL is set up now with all the teams passing the football. So I think he's going to be able to stick his hand in the dirt and be a natural pass rusher. I don't think they're going to ask him to stand up as much as many people thought when the pick was first made, but it was a surprising pick, but they got a good football player in Joey Bosa. Let's see how he fits in to the defense run by Pagano out in San Diego. And then, of course, the first two picks of the draft, Eagles at 2, take Carson Wentz. This was a no-brainer. They came up to get a quarterback at 2. He fits the system that they're going to be running under Doug Peterson, coming from Kansas City. And they run a little bit of that spread. They run a lot of read option. And I think this is a really good landing destination for Carson Wentz. Athletically gifted, big arm, mobile quarterback. I think this is going to be a great fit for him in Philadelphia. Actually, if Jared Goff would have dropped to 2, I think it would have been a huge mistake on the part of the Eagles coming up blindly. But because the L.A. Rams took Jared Goff and left Carson Wentz there for them to take, I think it worked out perfectly for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I think they already knew that Carson Wentz was going to be there for them at 2. That's why they went up. And, of course, Los Angeles Rams traded up from 15 about 2 weeks ago and got themselves in a position to take a quarterback. They take Jared Goff first overall in the draft to get the draft kicked off. He's a guy that was born and bred and raised in California, so it makes a lot of sense. Put butts in seats, get the quarterback that's probably the most ready to start out of the 2 in terms of Carson Wentz and Jared Goff. So you get the guy that's most ready to come in and maybe impact your team day one as a starter. So I think the Rams had a lot of different things that they were weighing pros and cons, but when it was all said and done, the guy that can put butts in the seat and the guy that can start right away was the option that they went with in Jared Goff, quarterback out of California. So there you have it. That's your wrap-up of the first round. I think the Browns might trade that first pick in the second round, 32nd overall. I know the Cowboys are very interested in coming up and getting that pick because they want a pass rusher. So we'll see what happens. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now close out this live feed, and I'm going to come back and we're going to open up the other live feed, which is going to be the one that I'm going to host while we watch the entire second and third round. The draft party will commence on my other feed, which I will open up here in the next minute or two. I will see you then. Thank you for joining me on the pre-draft breakdown of the second round, kind of looking at the first round and recapping that. Browns could be trading out of 32. Would not shock me. When I come back, we're going to jump into your comments and see how you feel about the second round coming up on the Louie Tee Network draft party. I'll see you in a second.